Dena, so I want to go back to politics because I wanted to ask you, seeing at the results of the election, not only at the presidential level, but also at the cabinet, at the Congress, U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives, do you have allies in the Republican Party? Do you see that the fact that now they have control of both cameras, of both chambers, and thinking of how difficult it has been for the LGBT movement to convince Republicans to adopt legislation that ends discrimination on LGBT people or marriage equality, and etc. And knowing the history of a president who tried to amend the Constitution to ban same-sex marriage, have you, in the past 10 years or so, built a stronger relationship with the Republican Party and allies?
You know, I think you have seen some significant changes over the last decade. For example, looking at, you know, when as we say, the rubber meets the road, you know, what really happens. I was mentioning the lack of federal protections. We do, though, have the Equality Act as a bill that was introduced into Congress last year, and it was a bipartisan bill. And so, you know, when you get past some of the rhetoric and you see how members of Congress actually vote, whether or not they will co-sponsor a bill, you do actually see an increasingly bipartisan support of LGBT inclusion.
And thinking of Donald Trump and his business, is his company advancing LGBT rights also for its employees, the Trump Emporium? Have you included it on your index?
We have looked into their policies and their benefits, and they are out of the norm, if you will, when you look at some of the other hospitality companies. And so we have not seen evidence of a comprehensive effort to ensure full LGBT inclusion for the employees at those companies. Okay,
so he has a bad score in there. But during the campaign, during the presidential campaign and after the Orlando shooting, he promised to protect all American citizens, to make America great again, also for LGBT people. Do you believe in his promise?
I think we need to see the actual actions to follow up with those words. Bringing up Orlando is particularly poignant because shortly after the massacre, he visited Orlando, but he did not visit with family members of the victims. He did not visit the memorial. He actually was there for a fairly anti-equality predominated group of activists. And so it's one thing to say that you're for all Americans. It's another to follow it up with actions that demonstrate, particularly in the wake of such a tragedy, that you do understand what grief is. And that grief, yes, it transcends communities, but there are times when it's also necessary to acknowledge this was a community that was targeted.
Sure. Following the election and after knowing the results, I read some news that many of the hotlines by some LGBT organizations receive multiple calls, an unusual number of calls, especially from LGBT people who were actually worried that marriage equality could be reversed, especially because Mike Pence, the vice president-elect, has said that he doesn't believe in marriage equality and that he believes in the traditional marriage, and that he would support nominating also justices that could revert the Obergefell decision. No? Do you think that's possible? Do you think that marriage equality could be erased from what's happening right now?
You know, it depends on the timeline you're talking about. People are nervous for good reason. As I said, the rhetoric has reached depths that I'm not sure anybody has seen in generations, if they've ever seen it in American politics. And I think what's particularly tragic, many of the people that we're hearing from LGBT organizations that are calling hotlines are really desperate young people, particularly transgender young people, pondering suicide, facing bullying. And so we do have a desperate need to assure particularly young people that they have value, that they have a place in their school, in their house of worship, and in the workplace. Exactly. And you know, it's been a pretty brutal year for transgender young people in the United States. Many of these bills targeted aspects of their dignity that should never be targeted. You know, we were able to fight back on some of these bills, and so we did have some successes at the state level. But there were student bills aimed at restricting whether or not a young transgender person can use the appropriate bathroom. And so, of all places, you know, our young people should feel safe and respected in their schools, and that was jeopardized this year. So I think the real fire alarm right now, the real red alarm, is to assure young people that they have value and that they have a place in this world.